What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the same. And right now, I'm feeling like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Greg Quinn of X Design. You can find him at xdesigninc.com. And Greg, before I formally introduce you, I always like to point out other episodes people should check out of the podcast. Some of my favorites, I actually did one with Adee Clevitt. She runs an agency where she helps businesses create SOPs. It's the non-sexy thing that makes things work. So we geeked out on our favorite tech stack, how she thinks about operations and SOPs. That's a good one. Also, another one, Kevin Hurrigan of Spinutech. He's been in the agency world, Greg, since 1995. I know you've been doing this for almost 3 decades now, maybe over that at this point. But he talked about the evolution of his agency, what it was like, the evolution of the services throughout, even the .com bust and everything else. So that was a very interesting episode with Kevin Hurrigan. So check that out and more on InspiredInsider.com. This episode is brought to you by Rise25. At Rise25, we help businesses give to and connect to their Dream 100 relationships. And how do we do that? We actually do that by helping you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do the accountability, the strategy, and the full execution. Greg, we call ourselves the Magic L's that work in the background to make it look easy for the company and the host so they could just create great content and develop amazing relationships. You know, for me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire and share with the world what they're working on. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, you can go to rise25.com to learn more. And I'm excited to introduce today's guest, Greg Quinn. He's designed spaces for some of the world's best known companies and brands. He's led his Toronto-based studio for over 29 years. And over the last 7, X Design has been one of the fastest growing interior design firms in Canada. They've worked with companies like AT&T, Disney Cruise Line, Nine West, Courtyard Group, and I can go on and on and on. You can check them out at xdesigninc.com. And Greg, thanks for joining me.
Super happy to be here. This is very exciting.
So just tell people a little bit about X Design and what you do.
Sure. We're a commercial interior design and project management firm. So we focus on designing commercial spaces mostly for businesses, companies, organizations. About 80% of our business is in corporate workplace. So we're, really focused on offices. We do have divisions though that specialize in healthcare, long-term care, and senior living. So that's another niche that we have a little squad that works on those things as well. We also do some retail and hospitality, which we find all of those things are, bleed into the corporate world these days, in that those spaces for years, for the past decade, have really been starting to bring in those features and amenities that so much of the hospitality and frankly, even sometimes living spaces need to have to support people that are working.
How did you get into this?
That's a really great question. I graduated in 94 and there wasn't any work. So what
did you think you were going to do at that time? Because, not everyone's like, especially in the agency world, like, I want to be a whatever when I grow up. What did you think, or what were you looking at doing before you got into this?
Well, I think, I studied architecture with architectural science and a major in project management. So I knew I was going to be in the built environment somewhere. But being in your young 20s, your frontal lobe isn't fully formed yet. So, I would say that there was very little direction and a little bit, maybe too much serendipity if I look back at it. But when we graduated in 94, we were graduating into a recession that was pretty brutal, particularly for the built environment here in Toronto where we're based. And so there wasn't much work to be had. So hanging up a shingle, within a few months of graduating to just do something. And the original scope of work that we put out was to do 3D modeling and rendering. So computer rendering for architectural projects was fairly new at the time. Some of us had a bit of a skill set because we'd learned that at school, doing drafting for other firms, as well as doing project management. And So we like to joke that we kind of built our design firm backwards, because we kind of started with all the back office stuff. And then within a few years, we graduated into, trying to have our own relationships with clients, because we didn't want to be, the third party in the background forever and ever, because we needed more control over how some of the projects were being run. So that we just naturally grew into the firm that we are today. But there was a point where I just kind of woke up one morning and realized, oh crap, we actually are an interior design firm. So then I became an interior designer, went through the process of taking my architectural background and formalizing the registration and all that sort of thing to become an interior designer. So I always kind of joke that the original business plan got thrown out the window within weeks, and we just kind of have been not winging it ever since. We do some pretty good strategic planning, but it's interesting where life takes you as you move along.
I mean, as you take projects, you learn and you see what the market is asking for too, and you evolve. So walk me through the evolution of the services. So first, you're doing 3D modeling and project management and drafting. Are you working at that point for architecture firms? Like you're kind of like outsourced?
Yeah, other architecture firms and interior design firms. So, and it's interesting because that in our DNA now, we had to learn how to be very collaborative, very egoless, because we're working on someone else's IP effectively, and making them functional and shine. So that kind of got bred into how we approach projects, when we're dealing with clients or vendors or the ecosystem around our projects. That ego list focus has really kind of become part of it. And so that really started. We were working in those markets, and that's exactly what happened. The clients just started to kind of say, hey, we like what you're doing there. Can you do that directly for us over here? And was really about keeping our ears and eyes open for where those opportunities really were, and how were we going to be able to grow and get services and get revenue. There's obviously, like, starting in 94, we started in a recession, and we also lived through the .com kind of boom bust as well, and 2008, and there's so it going through all of those different things and enabled us to really understand how to keep our eyes open for new opportunities and really watch out for stuff that might be coming that who could imagine.
You bring up a good point, because you saw the .com, you saw 2008 with the real estate, and then the pandemic. How are those different or the same of how it affected your business?
I think each one, interestingly, like the first couple, like, the .com and the and even the 2008, there were, our really reduction in work. I can't necessarily directly attribute it to that. Like those crises were actually the icing on the cake. We were at the time of the .com kind of focused on, it's a slightly different niche that really wasn't much of a market, but it seemed like it was pretty sexy, and
what was the niche
never really
at the time?
clicked. Well, it was really trying to take design. It was the beginning of design thinking and design strategy thinking, where corporations were really starting to get interested in the actual process and logic behind how designers, architects look at the world, and being able to kind of break down problems beyond just the built environment, but also within business. So we were getting into some opportunities where, a bank would ask us to say, what's the future of banking? And there's a built environment component, but there's also a operational component that includes technology and people and unions and all the kind of other factors that are going to factor into how do you change the operation of a bank. And those things are very, but you can kind of build them around the concept of, well, what does this look like physically? But then we can talk about all the other operational stuff in there, and it lets people envision these futures a little easier. So there's kind of that futuristic strategic planning piece. But as there's very little of that necessarily out there, where and it's a very competitive market, that companies sometimes like, listen, I don't need to necessarily create a new vision, 100%. I just need some modifications to what's going on today. And so and it's also generally a lack, I find, of strategic thinking in most organizations, where they're, people are really focused on what's happening this quarter, what's happening next quarter, how are we kind of getting this company continuing to just roll. They have very little time to kind of take a step back and really understand things. And I think the question of what's common between those three things is I've always been fascinated by the lack of imagination in business of what possibly could go wrong. Right. There's a lot of optimism. And human beings are really, our brains really work on optimism, and and that's a good thing in a lot of ways. But when you're overly optimistic about how, those early, that early .com economy was really working, and how far away from fundamentals it was getting. 2008, very similar, where people are like, oh, this can just continue to go up. In the 2008 to 2010 timeline, we were working in the Middle East. We had an office in Abu Dhabi as well as Toronto, and so they were like this heightened bubble of just entrepreneurial frenzy, where you could buy a building and flip it on the way to your car, for 20%, and it was just like this kind of craziness. But because we were coming in and out of it over traveling in, you got to see the bubble from the outside, and you kind of realize it's like, guys, this doesn't necessarily go on forever. This is like, this pops. And I think with the pandemic, that's also, one of these things where people were just so shocked as to what could actually happen, and what the implications would mean. And I mean, to the planet's credit, I mean, people adapted pretty quickly, which is, kind of one of the big, kind of interesting findings, I think, that we have of this great experiment of what the heck does society do when you've got to shut down.
What was the niche? What was your niche, or what were you focused on at the time of 2008?
We were doing a corporate workplace, but we also had multi-unit residential projects going on. So we had a large condo development in Cochin in India. We had a couple of other commercial projects that were kind of bubbling around in Chennai and as well in India, and then multiple commercial office and development projects going on in Abu Dhabi and Dubai.
And then what about the pandemic then? Before the pandemic hit, what were you focused in on?
Pandemic, again, still mostly workplace, but we, really after 2010, we retrenched back to Canada and said, listen, I call our Middle Eastern experiment my Middle Eastern MBA. That was kind of, it cost $100,000, and it was, very exciting and very interesting. And, really retrenching in Canada, we'd been retrenched. We were we bought 5 firms over 7 years. To diversify some of our client bases, to build some larger account work where we're managing larger accounts across Canada for companies like Citibank and Scotiabank and those sorts of things. So it enabled, we were working through a lot of those kinds of very corporate type projects, as well as some, still a lot of tech work. We were working on Instacart. Instacart, Achievers was another big Toronto tech company that we were in the middle of doing a 300-person office for at the beginning of COVID. The Disney's Cruise Line project was a big one that we started just as COVID was breaking out, where it's a practice facility for musicals here in the city that we built the original facility, and we're expanding and doubling the size of it. So a lot of those things were like the, relatively large projects, and then some smaller office things as well, but they were all pretty much hit pretty hard. Like things kind of came to a grinding halt.
Cruises, for example. I mean,
cruises. Yeah. So, the whole cruise, projects were related to those practice facilities relate directly to new ships that were in the process of being built. So, the pipeline and logistics of, hey, they're, you decide 8 years in advance that you're going to build this boat and build out all the facilities around the world that are going to support the building of it, but also the operations of it. And all those things, unwinding all of that or pausing it all is very, difficult. And I think that's, in a lot of ways, that's what we all experience, the complexity of all of the supply chains and logistics and those sorts of things, that we'd gotten really good at being able to kind of pick up the phone and order something and it showing up a week later. But what happens when you can't do that and it can't show up and it gets stuck, and we're reliant on this kind of international logistics chain that broke apart pretty quick.
I want to talk about the calls you were getting during COVID and when stuff started to go down, what was happening. But you mentioned a bunch of international clients. How did you get clients in the Middle East and India? What was the channel avenue for that?
For that, well, the Middle Eastern clients that was literally another serendipitous trip. A friend of mine, had run a business that had done a lot of work over there, and we had lunch one day, and he's like, you got to come check out this. There's a big show, a real estate show over there. It's it's something to see. You should, if you got time, you should take a trip over. It's only a 14-hour flight. And it'll be fun, and you got to see the city, like in Dubai, is just it's insane what they're building. You're just going to get a kick out of how quickly they're building stuff, and is going to so just organizing okay, I'll go over, and went over with a friend of mine, and we ended up. The Ontario government had a series of booths over there selling in the show, and someone dropped out at the last minute, and they're like, "Hey, we heard you're coming. Do you want to just present at a booth?" And it was like, sure, why not? And so we hung up a poster, and literally I left the 3-day show, with a partnership agreement with an architecture civil engineering firm in Abu Dhabi to open an interior design office for them there, and a 6 building 600 unit condominium project in India contract signed. And
it sounds like a fruitful show.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. Literally 2 weeks later, I was on a plane to India to present to the investors for behind this big development, and we helped kind of secure the funding from 12 different banks, just because of the initial design work that we were able to do for the suite designs and things. And we were just the interiors. There was a big Singapore architecture firm that was doing, a landscape architect from Australia. It was quite a thing. It all collapsed in 2010 when the funding dried up to be able to kind of build what they wanted to build. So the whole thing just kind of collapsed. But
when the pandemic hit, and they're building new cruise lines and things are happening, what was the incoming calls like that you were getting when this was all happening?
Well, the incoming calls was just like, pause it all, right? Turn it all off. And having been through a couple of other, scenarios of business, kind of business winding down relatively quickly, we were very, we've got a burn rate of, I don't know, maybe 4 months of payroll. Right now, I think at the time, our payroll was just a little over $2 million. So, we're burning. There's a lot of people to kind of get paid. And, the minute that fee flow is stopping, then it's like we're dead in the water. And so everything was
you
pretty
say it so calmly
month.
Greg.
Well, if you'd have told me in 94 that, hey, guess what, you're going to have this year it's going to be a $3.5 million payroll, and it's like, guess what, you're going to have you got to bill more than what you'd ever imagine you'd make in a year, just to kind of cover off everyone's salaries, and you're you're responsible for that. I would have probably rolled up the tent and said, okay, well, I'm not really into this, because it didn't the original business plan was to pay for rent and groceries and be able to kind of and but at the same time, that's been part of our growth strategy, is to really build a team that understands that this is a business, but it's a little economic engine that's really for, that works on behalf of our team first, and our ecosystem around us. We specify probably in the neighborhood of $100 to $120 million a year in products and services on behalf of our clients, and we manage all of that. So there's a lot of other businesses that rely on us doing a good job to make sure it's getting run well. And then our clients are, they're spending their good money on, kind of on things that are going to help their economic engines. So we need to make sure we're doing a good job for them. And so the having people around, we've been able to surround ourselves, as a leadership team in the firm of people that have that mission in mind, that it's, this isn't about personal wealth growth necessarily. That's people have to be able to live and live comfortably and live well and all that sort of thing. But, there's a we, instead of just the me in this whole thing. And then that we extends pretty, kind of pretty broadly. But we really, making sure that we're all taken care of is kind of job one.
When you were getting all the calls and people were saying, pause, stop, how did you navigate the company? How'd you navigate?
We really, it's just two owners, me and Sherry Crawford, who's one of the other owners. We acquired her firm several years ago as one part of our growth strategy, but she's part of the, kind of the younger management part of the team. So the two of us kind of really, we had a hard look at each other and said, okay, this is existential. We need to be 100% transparent with everyone to let them know, like, listen, this is what we're up against. This is, and here's what we are going to do. So this is what we're doing today and this week. This is what this is how we're attacking this. And basically, the senior management team basically was spent the first few weeks of just, okay, what are our options? How do we, what exactly is our cash position right now? What exactly is our burn rate? What's anything we can turn off that we can, we don't need, just what are we, where are we at? And what's our lifeboat? How much have we got in our lifeboat right now that we can make this work? And then, as each week we got everybody together and it's like, listen, this is how much money we have. Like, and we're generally transparent about how the business works. I think it's always been something that, listen, this is, it's a sweat business. It's like, it's effort in, we get paid for the time and energy that we put in, the value and the ideas, but there's never enough time. And, that's, our business is really around productivity. And so everyone kind of knows that. But then just relaying it to everyone to say, okay, this is how this is really going to affect us. If there's no revenue coming in, this is our problem. This is where our problem is at. And now in the meantime, we've got this downtime.
How did people respond? Because it's a scary thing to them.
Absolutely.
I mean, the world's unknown, let alone the company, right?
Well, yeah, and you have, we have people in, 4 demographics from, kind of baby boomers to, to young, Gen Z and the, so there's young families, there's older folks, there is a vast swath of folks, and some people are living in very small condos with their partners and they don't have much room to work. There's not enough room for 2 people to work in that 1-bedroom condo. And, so there's a lot of, it really kind of unfolds on a personal level for everybody. And I think, what we really tried to do is create a place, the company being a place of, hey, we're here to really support all of you. The whole economic engine piece, that like, this is what it's all about. This is about us being resilient and supporting each other and kind of forging into the unknown. But how do we do that? That's our business. We look to the future for clients to create spaces for them. So we should be able to create some alternative futures here. And how do we prepare for them so that we know that whatever we're doing and what are we actioning and actually, if we've got no work to do, then what do we do? It's like, well, what do we do to kind of make us stronger for the future? What do we, a lot of people there, wrote their professional designation exams. We rolled out, there's a couple of new software platforms that were like, great. Now we have the time to actually some people to take some serious course time and really dig into these things. And so within that first year, really we were able to hold on to everybody. Now up here, that we were, the biggest savior was within a few weeks there were word that there would be some sort of subsidies coming down from the federal government, which at the end of the day, that was, and again, with the transparent thing where everybody knew that we were on this line of like, hey, we don't know what's going to happen. And then the next week was, hang on, there's this hint that there might be some subsidies, that, this might be a thing. And then by week 3, it's like, okay, this is a little more details. This is what we found out. We've applied for these 2 things, and this is what we're going to do. And so that really by, week 4 and 5, it's like we were in full swing of, okay, so financially we think we can squeeze through here. And we can, so now it's just going to be a question of how do we keep ourselves busy and productive and emotionally supported through a ridiculously difficult time. And at the end of the day, the intention was let's come out of this stronger, which in fact is what happened, where the team kind of elevated what was happening. Like, there's so many improvements and things that were going on that everyone was just too busy to work on anyway before, because we were so busy on projects, that it just seemed to be one of the most productive times of the organization, and in the middle of a kind of an ongoing rolling disaster.
People are always asking you, I'm sure, Greg, the future of workplace, because you have a different vantage point than everyone else across industries, across cities, across different types of work spaces. What's been the shift after the pandemic, and what have you seen as looking forward as kind of more the future of work? Because I know some companies, they're, half and half, they're, hybrid. Some, they've seen it even more important to be back in the office. Some just use it as an excuse to get rid of their office space. So what are you seeing as kind of the future?
Listen, I mean, to sum it up, the future is flexible. There's a lot of driving factors that really determine what a company should really do. It depends on what the company does. It depends on how the people interact. It's a lot about the culture and the work culture, the leadership style. It really is almost an anthropological exercise these days to kind of really get into understand, how are people communicating? What is the language of that company? What are the customs? And then layering on what is the space then that is required for those things. And we always start our conversations with clients now where, listen, there's been companies that have 0 office space and they've never had office space. And companies like Automatic that run WordPress, or 37 Signals that and there's some great, they've always had great books and stuff about like their experience about managing a company without of space. But then there's also companies that they're still doubling down on space, or they need to have space. So 2 companies that we worked with, one was a financial trading company where they could all work from home and do the trading, but they like to walk up and down the aisles and yell at each other while they're doing trades, because it's just like, it's a Wolf of Wall Street kind of style. It's a culture thing, right? And it's like, we could do it, but no, we're gonna. So they actually expanded their office a little. Or another company, there's a fruit and vegetable distributor in the province where, they have to be beside the warehouse. Like they have to, you can't check on the quality of those tomatoes from Zoom. So there's, and there's a vast majority of workers actually that are, even knowledge workers, are in those situations where they're, there's a physical connection with something they're doing. So some of those are, those are easy ones. But the vast messy middle of companies, really that are, in some sort of, flexible hybrid kind of mode where people are only in partial times and those sorts of things. That's a majority of companies. And what pre-COVID we used to do, we would do workplace strategy with folks to integrate a little bit of flexibility into their planning, because companies were, filling up their space, and they're like, man, we got like, what's our strategy to kind of use space in a better way that we just don't need to have to keep multiplying workstations and things. And we were doing a massive study at the beginning of 2020 with one city just outside of Toronto, where it took about a year to negotiate and figure out to get one department of 40 people to agree to do a flexible work study. Let's like we'll just let people kind of come 3 days a week, and this will have a massive impact if it rolls out. But to convince just for like one department to do it, it took a year. There's technology info and all that sort of thing. We literally decided to start the pilot. I think it was like the first week in March or something. And then, of course, all hell breaks loose. And
that helped with your
study. Guess what? We're gonna study. We're gonna throw everybody into the study, and that's kind of what the entire, the whole continent did. And what we knew all along was when you start introducing flexibility into people's lives, you're giving something that's pretty powerful to be able to kind of give time back in a workday when it comes to commuting, when it comes to interacting, and those benefits really start multiplying. And that's basically what we've seen. It's like, oh, that's what we thought was going to happen. That's what and that's what would happen in the studies we did previously. But now they've really seen the genie's out of the bottle. And one of the fun facts, like pre-COVID, the number one complaint when we start our process with surveys of teams, of getting cultural, kind of a cultural temperature, as well as just the practical stuff, like how far is your commute? What's the worst thing you hate about coming into the office? It's always a question I love. Number one answer pre-COVID, the commute. And, in the GTA, in the Toronto area, the average commute was something like 45 minutes each way. So it's an hour and a half a day. And across all parts of the city and everything, it just seems to be the same. And so I hate the commute. The fun thing now is when we're doing surveys now with clients that people are coming in 1 day a week, number one thing they hate, it's the commute still. So even though we've fixed their number one complaint, it is still the number one complaint. So when you see these companies saying, hey, listen, we just come back to the office. It's like, yeah, but my number one complaint about working there is this thing that you're making me do now again. And so the why do I have to come into the office is the much more important piece of really understanding the pieces of what people are missing in their individual business cultures. Of, generally what the most thing people are missing is I just miss my peeps. I miss hanging out with my workers. It's like, we had the gang that would go out for lunch and we would do, they miss the social interaction. They don't miss, collaboration and all this technology things and stuff in a lot of ways for a lot of organizations works. And, you can see it in that businesses are still running, but, there's some of these people to people things of relationships. And again, it gets into that social, how do people be part of their tribe, their business tribe. And it's really hard to build this over Zoom. And if you go back to some of those companies that never have an office space, they still devote a considerable amount of energy. At least once a year, the entire company gets together. They get together and work teams together so that there's time to kind of build people to people connections. And so, what we're seeing is this, the importance of space becomes much more intrinsic to that culture and that people support if it's done well. If you're just like, I'm a walk around manager because I don't think anybody's doing anything unless I'm seeing them do it, then that's a different business culture. And the people are kind of, workers are voting with their feet as to what they're looking for, those opportunities where how does the work support me, knowing that I still have to support the work. I need to do the work, but how is this a better kind of equitable arrangement between worker and business?
Greg, I'm fascinated by your process, and so we'll walk through maybe an example of your process, because I would think you start off with this discovery and actually figuring out what people like or don't like about the culture and workspace. And it's a really foundational place to start. And you probably have had some fascinating answers and responses and realizations throughout the world, throughout the life of the company. And I'm sure companies that work with you get data that they didn't expect to get, I would think, when they hire you. Like, we didn't realize we were going to get all this qualitative data on the culture and the workspace. We just thought, hey, you're going to build like an amazing area so we could be innovative, et cetera. So
Yeah.
I want to talk about the process, but talk about what are some of the other, you said number one, when you survey, is commute that people do not like. What are some of the other things on the list?
Well, I mean, sometimes it's amenity spaces. It's like, hey, we have a really crappy lunchroom, right? Like, I can't. There's nowhere to eat my lunch, or there's never enough meeting spaces, to work in. So there's a variance of, kind of amenity space that supports some of the tasks that they're doing, to kind of, also personal space, and then sometimes it's even like, that's where you'll find out that, hey, the Wi-Fi really sucks in this wing of the complex, and things like that. I can't work on my laptop there. I got to go over there, and those kinds of things. So you get those little nuggets that kind of become part of the program of, okay, here's what we need to, like, if we're going to do anything, we need to address some of these issues.
Yeah. What did you find after the pandemic, niches or types of companies coming to you changed at all?
Yeah, like I think it's hard not to go through that kind of process where people are like not addressing like who we are as a business, and that sort of thing. I think in particular, like, we worked through DLL Group, is a financial group out of the Netherlands, and we did their headquarters here in Canada. And that was that's a perfect example of one where we were there with they were starting their process just as COVID was breaking out, and they were kind of jam-packed into 30,000 square feet of space. They were growing, so they were going to be adding another, I think at the time, maybe they had 270-ish people. They were going to be growing to 330 was their projections. And so
by the way, if people are just listening to the audio, we are looking at the video. There is a video piece we're showing. This is the xdesigninc.com site. You can find out all their stuff and work here, but we are looking at the DLL office. So keep going. I'm just going to scroll sure. as you're talking.
So the initial engagement, and this was really a very much a pre-COVID condition of our business, is very often, I liken it, I called us, we were just kind of people warehousing. How many people you have today? How many you have tomorrow? How many, what kind of space do you use today? Let's extrapolate that for the bigger number. There's your square footage. So they'd already were in the market looking for 55,000 square feet to house their 330 people. So the engagement started at the beginning with that going, well, we think we need 55, but now we're all working remote, and we actually didn't meet them in person for the first six or 7 months of the project, which, this was done in the heat of the lockdowns. And the interesting thing was, as we go through, as we basically do our culture surveys and our requirements surveys, so that basically goes out to the entire organization. We do a whole training process to basically get them to understand what different space topologies look like and those kind of activities that it can support. So here's your modern menu of kinds of spaces you can use. And then from the data gathering and from the menu of spaces, we start drawing lines together to say, here's these activities that you guys really do. These are the kind of spaces that can support those things. And that's really a function. That's an activity-based planning kind of process that we stick into this, this whole journey. And from that, you end up with a menu of, okay, well, these are the kinds of spaces we think you need. But then it was coming down to, well, let's really talk about how many spaces and how many people are going to be there. And so we literally started building scenarios of, well, here's your 55,000, here's if everybody's coming in, but that just does not seem likely. Again, the genie's out of the bottle. This is, you guys are working well, but you're missing, here's those different things that you're missing. People are missing the social aspects of working together. They're missing the fun bits, but they're also missing the one-on-one management and leadership, conversations and those coaching conversations. And, we need spaces for those. And there still had a bit of operational need where it's like, where do all of our financial we have a lot of financial documents, kind of still physically floating around. We need a place for those to go to. So the program got really refined, but with the idea that, well, how many desks do we really need? And so we kept building scenarios, and we had scenarios that were down to 22,000 square feet, and maybe there was 80 desks, 90 desks. So almost like a desk for every few people kind of, ratio. And we were in a workshop with them and we'd done different workshops with the leadership teams and the management teams. And so we're with the leadership team, and they're like, okay, can we go even farther? And we were like, how far do you want to go? And they're like, can we chop another 4,000 square feet off? And can we just and maybe, as we
it's a big decision from them, from an overhead perspective. And they're really, you're really trying to predict the future a little bit in a lot of realms for them.
Well, yeah. And so so we had to kind of, we took, we were like, yes. So we ended up building a space that had 30 desks. So like a 1 in 10, but the rest of the space is a clubhouse, and they ended up taking 18,000 square feet. So rough calculation of saving a year in rent is around $1 million. So for a 10-year lease, that was like a $10 million savings. That is, that's a hard to ignore piece. And a project cost like that, we reused a few things, but we had to buy some new stuff. The overall construction and furniture and all that sort of thing, we're probably in for 2.7 million, I think was the final number. We were a little under budget, where it's always we like to be, just a little under budget. But recreating that work environment for them and really providing a place where it's, okay, this is what your future could look like. But it really involved a lot of discussions and a lot of envisioning of, okay, let's talk about the kind of conversations you can have in this space. And is this the kind of space you think you could use? And at the end of the day, there were some spaces that didn't make it. They're like, you know what? I don't think I'd ever see myself in a meeting like that. I don't think we need that. I think we need 2 more of those things, right? And or a little bit more work in, the work cafe. So basically, there's expandable spaces that could be multifunctional all over the place. And the other interesting thing is that there's still a possibility, if all of a sudden they do have 100 people show up every day and they need a desk to sit at, we've got flexibility where we can move some furniture around and drop those desks in, and the flexibility is there without having to pull another building permit, which is kind of that's a fun party trick to do, where listen, you don't need to hire us again. We'll just do a little furniture plan for the, we even already have that scenario built for them, where it's like, you just go to scenario 7, and that, that area can be 6 more people if they need a desk. There's still, though, over 18,000 square feet, there can still be, I think we have 155 work points. So 155 people can comfortably sit in and work in that space. It's just not at a desk. So,
yeah. So it sounds like from the process perspective, like it's a lot of info gathering, surveys, getting data. And then from there, there's training involved. Then you kind of set up a menu of options that you go through, and then kind of you assess the activity levels in the different places, and then kind of the construction or kind of whatever the build out looks like comes next.
Yeah, that's basically, we flesh the whole thing out in a computer model and plans. So, in those cases, we modeled everything that was there to kind of say this is not only what it's going to look like, as a layout. If you're buying a condo or a house, you can kind of get the little plans, but you can actually this is what it's going to be like if you're standing.
They can visualize it.
Yeah, and it makes it very easy. And then we have to take that set of 3D plans and turn it into a set of permit drawings and construction drawings, and get a bunch of contractors to bid on it, and then manage the winning bid to make sure that they build it properly and they build it on time.
Love it.
Yeah.
Thanks for walking through that. You mentioned earlier about growth, and really acquisition was a strategy. At what point did you decide you were going to grow through acquisition?
Well, we about 10 years ago, we really came to a point, we'd been running the business for 19 years at that point. And it kind of limped along. And I always liken it as like, that was kind of like the first couple of iterations of the business was, us learning how to run a business, like we kind of learned on our own dime. And there was a moment 10 years ago where it's like, hey, if we don't really ramp up the profitability and the scale of this, either we go, either we go to a smaller scale where it's just 4 or 5 folks, we can, kind of, we just, we're niche consultants, we can just do our thing, and that's fine. Or we need to kind of, we were kind of in this weird dead zone of around 10 or 11 people, and it kind of, in our business, you just, you've got to either, ramp it up or ramp it a little down. And the reality was, the things that we felt we really wanted to do, like some of these larger projects, we couldn't do with 4 people. We couldn't take on all the interesting opportunities that were actually out there. So growth basically became the goal. Like, okay, we need to grow, but we need to grow in a resilient and sustainable way. But we need to kind of set our market around, like we need to be at least 25 people-ish or so. And so we retooled, some of our operational things. We became ISO 9001 certified, which is like totally nerdy, but like that really became kind of an operating system of, hey, if we're going to be adding a whole bunch of people over the next several years, we all need to be marching to the same sheet music here. And so let's get organized around this. So we kind of went through and bit the bullet to really develop that. And that's become kind of one of the foundational operating system pieces for us. And then we started going along. And so we grew, the first year of our plan was like, oh, that was good. Okay. We,
were you
30%.
Were you reaching out to firms, or was there brokers that you worked with to find opportunities?
Well, like at first we were starting to do just organic, like we were just going to grow organically. We were just going to get more clients, hire more people, and get going. We got into year 2 of our growth, and it was just kind of flat from the, it's like, okay, we grew year 1, year 2, it didn't really go anywhere. And around that same time, that just, a conversation started with, hey, did you know, Mario Colorasi's firm, he's was asking some people, if they wanted to buy it. And there was a hint of the price, and I'm like, oh, that's like sounds actually super reasonable. Like, and I should call, I knew Mario, like the community is fairly tight here. And so that conversation turned into, yeah. And that, and then literally our second acquisition was a friend of his that ran a slightly larger firm called Interseed that, we still have clients that are in Interseed that, we haven't rolled the brand down. Colorasi's final projects just ramped down in the spring. So we were still running them as a brand, just because they already had contracts that were running. So that happened to that. And then we'd expanded to an office in Hamilton, because we saw that a lot of young folks, and this goes back to 2017, beginning of 2018, where we were seeing that young folks couldn't be affording to live in Toronto anymore. And so we had that kind of cohort of 30-ish designers that are, they're senior great designers, but they're moving to Hamilton. So working in Toronto is going to be a problem. Hamilton's just outside of the city. But it's a fairly large little town on its own. So we said, well, if we had a satellite office out there and distributed our office a little bit, then, maybe we'd have a good opportunity to maybe pull some of those Toronto designers back into the fold, and they could work from out there. And so, in fact, that's what we did. And we ended up renting space from a friend of mine, Sherry, who, after renting a space from her for a year, was like, listen, why don't we just merge this whole thing together and just, do this together? And then by that point, it's we're the company that buys other companies now. That's kind of like our thing. So
what are some of the learnings, calls, Greg, on that that you take now that you've done several of them, that you take the next one, that if someone's like, yeah, I'm thinking of doing this, what are some learnings that you had, maybe good things, maybe mistakes
Well, I mean, I got to say, like, out of the five, like every single one of them have been successful. Like we've been like, which is a really like ridiculous ratio, because a huge portion of these, as you probably know, or mergers and acquisitions normally do not go well. Like you see some stats where like 80% of them just fail, and 100% of ours have been great. So knock on wood.
Yeah. Why do you think?
I think the number one things are we're looking for a cultural fit. So we've looked at as many companies. We've probably looked at twice as many companies as we've actually acquired. So we've had conversations at different things for twice as many as the five that we've actually acquired. So very often, if there's not a cultural fit, so if we're not speaking the same business language, if we don't think about our, again, it's a cultural mix, where the way that we think about people, treat our people, the way that kind of our expectations and accountability that we expect out of people. If some of those different things aren't aligned on a culture basis, those are it's not going to work. And you can that can generally will come out in a first conversation where the intention and the expectation of what this is all about is it's not it's not going to work. And so for us, it was really, being honest about those things, and also coming to it, like particularly now, like we were working on one this year that it didn't play out, not for any really horrible reasons, but like we're also at a stage where if they don't work out, like it's not like we don't have to grow, so. We're not in a like a kind of a this is our number one strategy. This is just really an extra strategy. And I think having it as an extra strategy to just be aware that there is this opportunity where you might have, if you're in a market of whatever business you're in, and there's another player, one of your competitors, or that just getting to that, like, hey, I got to wind this thing down. There's a potential opportunity there to kind of say, hey, like, you not only are you helping them wind that thing down, because you can't just turn off the light on a business, as like it just, there's never a moment where it's a catastrophic end, or it's some sort of gradual decline where it just kind of winds down, or it's how do you can transition ownership. And so I think it's looking for those opportunities that might be there, but it's not the number one strategy. It's because we still have to be doing lots of business development, lots of lead generation, lots of great, 85% of our work comes from our existing client base and our ecosystem of partners. So, we continually need to be a good partner for all those people. And that's the most important thing. We just got to do great work.
I know, Greg, different industries have different ways of calculating valuations.
Yeah.
How do the valuations, going through this, how are the valuations calculated in this industry?
Generally, it's an EBITDA valuation, usually somewhere between 3, maybe, we've gone into the high 3s on some that, that if there's some, kind of valuable processes or things like that are like kind of net new to our operation that we would evaluate, but generally it's a 3 times multiple on EBITDA.
I know it depends on what the revenue of the company is, on what the EBITDA is, possible valuation, right? The lower ones may have less multiples, and higher ones may have higher ones. So I have one first of all, Greg, thanks for sharing your journey and your stories. I have one last question before I ask it. I just want to point people to xdesigninc.com to learn more about what they're doing. Check out our work page. They have some obviously beautiful spaces that they've helped with, so you can check that out. My last question is just resources that you like. It could be conferences, trade shows, books, people you've had colleagues, mentors that have helped you along the journey. So any resources that you have found valuable for you?
Yeah, listen, I think the number one thing is building a community of other practitioners and business people that are either exactly in your space or adjacent, and, being able to have transparent and open conversations with that group. So again, because we grew up working with other firms and things, we kind of, started having these relationships with a whole bunch of different folks, and we were able to learn so much. But to do that, if you're going to get shared too, you need to share a lot as well. So, I'm pretty transparent and open with our, if anybody asks me my numbers, our business is wide open to all, even, there's a whole bunch of competitors I hang out with that will trade numbers, and some years it's, we're cursing each other. We're like, wow, you did really great. I gotta do some of that. And so I think that, as a resource that anyone can build, it's how do you build up that network? And I think, and there are lots of great groups to look in our space. PMSJ is like this great consulting team out of the States that run a great newsletter. There's some great books. And I think that's the other, the other thing is just, is also reading just even outside of your direct, area of practice. Like I just finished a book by Andy Grove, high performance management. That's like probably from the 80s. But, looking at understanding how business works from multiple different, places. And even for us that the reading lists that we're sharing internally it is also about learning about the businesses that we're working with too. So you want to be kind of understand and be empathetic about, okay, well, these are the kinds of things they're going through, not just about how do we make our business better, but it's how do we have deeper relationships with some of our clients to understand what they're doing. Current big one I'm reading right now is The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek, which I think is I think it's kind of a bit of a confirmation bias to his view towards business, but I think I feel like that's always been one of our things of, listen, this isn't about kind of working to some grand exit for me personally after, so many years. It's how does this thing become this engine that in a couple of generations, they don't even know who I am. And that's kind of fun to think about where, you create this economic thing that can actually support people's lives. And, we send people's kids to college and people are having babies and people are retiring. And that's kind of you're supporting this whole circle of life. And I think that Infinite Game really kind of sums up a different mindset about how to look at not just business, but just generally, as opposed to a win-lose perspective, but more of a, how do you kind of set this up with, within a framework of yourself and a business to think about it more in longer term.
Love it. Greg, I'm the first one to thank you. Thanks for sharing all of your stories, your journey. Everyone check out xdesigninc.com to learn more, and we'll see everyone next time.
Thanks, Jeremy. This is great.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like $100 grand.